Welcome to an episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo. The film that I will be discussing is Drumline. Drumline is a 2002 comedy drama film. It is directed by Charles Stone III, who's known for films such as Mr. 3000 and Uncle Drew. The film was written by Tina Gordon Chisholm, who worked on the film Little. The film stars Nick Cannon, Zoe Saldana, and Orlando Jones. Here is the synopsis. Set against a high energy, high stakes world of show style marching bands, Drumline is a fish out of water comedy about a talented street drummer from Harlem who enrolls in a southern university expecting to lead its marching band's drumline to victory. He initially flounders in his new world before realizing that it takes more than talent to reach to the top. The film was released in theaters on December 13th, 2002. It had a budget of $20 million. It made over $56.3 million worldwide. It opened at number 3 domestically with over 12.6 million. It was beaten by Made in Manhattan and Star Trek Nemesis. In terms of critical reception, it has a 3.1 rating on Letterboxd. It was nominated for 3 Teen Choice Awards, including Choice Movie, Drama / Action Adventure. At the time of this recording, it is available to stream on Disney Plus and is available on demand, so check your local provider. All right, let's get into first discovery. I think I was in the 8th grade, so I was attending middle school. During class, a classmate decided to put on this movie and watch. I'm like, oh, I really dig this movie because I really enjoyed the music and, of course, Zoe Saldana. I enjoyed at the time because of Center Stage, and yeah, Nick Cannon, of course, is great in the movie. And then, of course, throughout the years, I still enjoy the movie. But as I got older, I do notice the flaws. So yeah, I really appreciate that it really highlighted marching bands. That apparently, like, it's a big thing that there's competitions for marching bands, which is insane, especially in the U.S. Because since I live in Canada myself, yeah, this was insane to learn that yeah, there are competitions out there for marching bands. In this case, particularly for predominantly black marching bands. So I found that's cool to watch. So let's get into the highlights. So here, this movie highlights that the band is important. Clearly, it is a team effort, so there's no room for mistakes. Essentially, there's no I in team being in the band. And we see throughout the movie there are various bands competing, even though we see them briefly at times, especially when we get to the BET Classic. But yeah, it was just nice to see all that stuff. And the drummers, especially in this movie, are really crucial because it seems like the bands they revolve around the drummer since it's called Drumline. And clearly they're treated from other sections. So we saw during the training sessions, they cannot rest when other sections are resting. And we see them doing lots of push ups. And I imagine, yeah, it's quite stressful being a drummer in this movie, especially what they had to go through. But as Sean pointed out in some point in the movie, that drummers are the heart and the soul, and they are the pulse, essentially, because without a pulse, you're done, essentially. And the music numbers, of course, are great, and the soundtrack as well too. Because yeah, clearly it's very 2000s for the soundtrack, but I would say for me it still holds up. In terms of songs, I really enjoyed Chasey Chazé. If you remember him from NSYNC, he had this song. I would say his popular song to date as a solo artist, "Blow Me Up with Her Love." I mean, that's quite catchy. That's played when the people at the drum line they are having their party. This was right as Nick Cannon's character had to get his head shaved, and he decided to show up with the razor so he could get his head shaved and all that stuff. So that's cool. And also too, yeah, the numbers from the bands themselves are excellent. I would say for me, that stood out was the final numbers, of course, at the BET Classic, of course, because I find in terms of scenes I like to rewatch from this movie on YouTube, I would say the whole BET Classic with them performing their number, and of course the final battle between Morris Brown and A&T. So that's cool. Also, too, yeah, of course, the rivalry between A&T and Morris Brown, because interesting to see the different approaches that both teams have. So we don't follow too closely with Morris Brown, but from what we could see under Mr. Wade's leadership is that he's quite laissez-faire with his leadership, where essentially, this was when I guess Devin approaches him. Mr. Wade tells him that, oh, he doesn't care if he doesn't know how to read music and all that stuff, and kind of allows the band to play a lot of hip hop numbers. You could say a lot of modern music. While with Dr. Lee, many would say he's very uptight, but essentially he's all about education, which is not bad to have, because I mean, of course, you have to learn. But yeah, essentially, he has like this military approach to his style, where we see during the training sessions, there's a lot of marching involved, and it's quite stressful with those moments. But it makes the band stronger because, as he said in this movie, one band, one sound. So there's no room for error, essentially, at least under Dr. Lee's leadership. And interesting, yeah, with Dr. Lee and Mr. Wade, they kind of have their showdowns throughout this movie. So I would say the first time is when during one of the games, both teams go back and forth with their numbers. So if Mr. Wade plays, of course, the hip hop songs, I know one of them is "Jump on It," and then Dr. Lee decided to respond by having the band play "Flight of the Bumblebee," where it's just a lot of horns playing essentially, and people are like wondering like, what is this? And it's funny at one point that the crowd that's supporting A&T, they move along to when Morris Brown plays their set, which is hilarious. But then I believe this is shown in the extended version of the movie. But after that, the A&T band, they decide to improv the number, which wins the crowd. So that was cool to watch there. And then also to another moment with them is this was after one of the games where essentially Mr. Wade approaches Devin to be a part of his team. Essentially gives him the card. And then like Dr. Lee was not having it essentially. And it's funny that like Mr. Wade, offers him a job and all that stuff. Then, but Dr. Lee is like, nope, I'll just use the card as toilet paper and all that stuff with that line. That's hilarious. And speaking of Dr. Lee, I would say he's one of the highlights of this movie for me. Orlando Jones plays Dr. Lee, and I would say it's a different sort of performance than the stuff that I typically see him play in. So he's done a lot of like comedic work, such as Evolution, which I've previously covered in the podcast, and Office Space. So he's good in those roles. But here, like he's playing like the straight man, essentially, the more like the authoritarian figure. But even though people might say he's uptight and all that stuff, he's under a lot of pressure, especially like from President Wagner, who threatens to cut the program if there aren't changes made to improve. Essentially, he really cares about the craft and the music at the end of the day, I guess, which is why he's strict with the students so that they could do better and all that stuff. So, but at least with Dr. Lee, he's able to embrace both old and new music. So there's that. I don't know why Dr. Lee is only interested in the old music. Of course, old music is great, but also too, there's some greatness of new music too. So new music has their ups and downs and all that stuff. But at least he's able to embrace that towards the end. Also too, if you remember during the 2000s, AJ and Free from 106 in Park, that was quite the big deal, especially if you watch BT during that time. So that was just cool to see. It's just too bad what happened to that program, maybe to, and also too with BT to an extent. But yeah, it was just nice to see them along with Blue Cantrell, who sang like the national anthem in the movies, which is great. And of course, we had P.D. Pablo. He was great in the movie where he performed alongside Morris Brown College during the final number. It was hilarious that before he went on stage, he was driving the car, but he was on the phone at the same time. I mean, which is not good because you should not drive while you're on the phone, but otherwise, yeah, he was just fun to watch in this movie. And also, too, it's fun that rewatching it now, you get to see people that you thought you wouldn't have seen. So, most notably, Shamia Morton, if you guys watch The Real Housewives of Atlanta, she's in this movie where she's one of the dancers alongside Layla. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I wasn't sure at first. I'm like, oh, it looks like her. But then when I checked on IMDb, she's listed as a dancer. So I'm like, cool, cool. I would love to know her experience in this movie and all that stuff because that would be fascinating to learn about. But yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And yeah, I would say the cast overall did a great job with the movie. So there's that. All right, let's get into the lowlights. So most of this is going to revolve around Devin, which was played by Nick Cannon. So I don't have an issue with Devin with his upbringing because essentially he's raised by a single mom who's always there for him. And of course, he had issues with his dad, and there was a whole thing where he showed up to his dad's work to give him his graduation certificate and all that stuff. And then later in the movie, his father sends him tapes, I would say, I guess, of his recordings because his dad was a musician and all that stuff, I guess, which is nice. So I don't have an issue with that. But what I do have an issue, I just wondered what was Devin's deal with this movie? Because it seems like since the beginning of this movie, he's quite a jerk. So during like his graduation, he decides to, play around with the music essentially, which catches, I guess, his teacher's attention and all that stuff. But I guess they didn't care because it's graduation, all that stuff. But essentially, throughout the movie, like we see that he doesn't want to follow the rules, and we just wondered why. It seems like he wants to be at the center of attention, which I don't get. I mean, obviously he's talented and all this stuff, but he clearly has a big ego problem and all that stuff. And interesting, I guess too, because of that ego, he often clashes with Sean, which could have been avoidable. And but then they do get along towards the end, which how they resolve that is hilarious. Um, and also too, a big deal is that Devin doesn't know how to read music, which is insane though, because you figure that in high school at least he has to know how to learn that stuff unless he decided to, disregard it at one point if let's say reading music wasn't necessary for high school. I don't know. But then how because how like he gets exposed to not learning knowing music, that's wild though. But I bet with Devin he had to know that was coming, especially since with the band they make a big deal like, oh, you have to know how to read music. But Devin just seemed not to care, so I just wondered at the end what's his problem, you know? So there's that. And then also too, as a low light, the justifications for his actions in this movie is just insane though. So he gets kicked out of the band. This was after the fight at homecoming. And also to, yeah, not knowing how to read music. So once all that happens, he at one point decides to provide music to Sean for the final number, which they end up collaborating, which I don't know why that happened. And it seemed like all was forgiven because he's able to get back to the band. Well, technically, he will be officially be back for the next season, but he was able to play during the final battle. He's dating Layla, played by Zoe Saldana. And after what happened at homecoming, she ignores him. No surprise because she's there for her parents, and why would she introduce him to the parents after all that stuff? And then he gives her the silent treatment once she sees him at the cafeteria, making her, which makes her feel bad. But then at some point, all is forgiven. It's like what? Because I wouldn't mind that stuff had he actually apologized for his actions. But since he did not, I'm just like, that stuff is just annoying to me though. Because it seemed like what he doesn't care. Again, going back to what is his problem? Because he should have apologized and at least, it makes the audience root for him. And I would say for me, like it was a bit tough for me to root for this character, especially with how he's laid out in this movie. So there's that. And then lastly, as a low light, I just feel like with the dancers, they could have been more involved, I guess, during practices and all that stuff. It seemed like for the most part, they're kind of just doing their own thing. Unless this is how it actually goes down with the way marching bands rehearse and all that stuff, I just wish there could have been more involvement with the dancers. All right, let's get into trivia. So, not a lot that I could find for this movie. So, apparently, with Morris Brown is a real college in Atlanta, but with Atlanta A and T, no such thing. So, the filming was done at Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta and at Morris Brown. So, the performers, aside from those from Morris Brown, were recruited from high school and university bands all over Atlanta and metro Atlanta area. High school band director Don Roberts was recruited to turn the performers into real convincing bands. Interesting. So Nick Cannon, he did his own drumming on screen while his double, Jason Price, did a majority of the close-ups with complex techniques. Also, too, Leonard Roberts, who plays Sean, was very sick when the last scenes of the BT Southern Classic were filmed, which is why he's so sweaty and looks slightly weak at the end of the film. Interesting. And lastly, there was a sequel that came out. This was on VH1 called Drumline, A New Beat, premiered on TV on October 21st, 2014, with Nick Cannon and Leonard Roberts reprising the roles. Now, at some point, I don't remember when, but I was able to watch it on YouTube. And yeah, that's a terrible movie. I do not recommend that one at all. Like it's clearly one of those made to TV or straight to DVD, whatever you want to call it, type movies. And yeah, it's just not great. Not great. All right. Lastly, should this movie be rediscovered? And I would say sure. I would say I recommend it for the music, also to see bands, how those are crucial. See marching bands. No, let's. I would say for the music portion, yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of a writing perspective, no, there's issues there. But yeah, there's moments they have, of course. But overall, there's flaws in this movie. But I would say yeah, sure, check it out. Alrighty. So that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you can find me on Instagram, X, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Linktree at Namfi Malloy. You can find the podcast on Instagram, X, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Linktree at RD Movies Pod. Visit buymeacoffee.com/RD Movies Pod to support the podcast via donation and also to look at exclusive posts there. Join the Rediscovered Movies Hub, which is our community group on the official Wix website, which is rdmoviespod.wixsite.com/official, where you can interact with others, share thoughts on the podcast, and more. On Spotify, you can answer the feature poll, leave a comment, and rate the podcast. You can leave a review and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, and Podchaser. Submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, or you can fill out the contact form in our link tree to be featured on a Q&A episode, which will air after the end of the season. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope to catch you on the next one.